Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvigacharya Ashtatara Shara Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gauda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Shri Amuna Maya Ki Jai. Shri Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Shri Mati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gauda Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we're going to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 76, Verse 29. Na Yadunam Kule Jata Shruyate Rana Vichyuta Vina Mat Kliba Chitena Sutena Prapta Kilbishat Nayadunam Kule Jataha Shruyate Rana Vichyuta Vina Mat Kliba Chitena Sutena Prapta Kilvishat Nayadunam Kule Jataha Shruyate Rana Vichyuta Vina Mat Kliba Chitena Sutena Prapta Kilvishat Nayadunam Kule Jataha Shruyate Rana Vichyuta Vinamat kliba chitena. Sutena prapta kilbishat. Devotees? Adunam kule jata. Shruyate rana vichuta. Vinamat kliba chitena. Sutena prapta kilbishat. Nayadunam kule jataha. Naterana vichuta. Yayana chitena. Sutena prapta kilbishat. Nayadunam kule jata. Shruyate rana vichuta. Yunana kliba chitena. Shutane prapta kilbishat. Okay, word by word synonyms. Na, not. Yadunam, of the Yadus. Kule, in the family. Jataha, one who was born. Shruyate, is heard of. Rana, the battlefield. Vichuta, who abandoned. Vina, except for. Mat, me. Kliba, like that of a eunuch. Chitena, whose mentality. Sutena, because of the driver. Prapta, gotten. Kilbishat, stain. Translation. Except for me, no one born in the Yadu dynasty has ever been known to abandon the battlefield. My reputation has now been stained by a driver who thinks like a eunuch. Please repeat. Except for me, no one born in the Yadu dynasty has ever been known to abandon the battlefield. My reputation has now been stained by a driver who thinks like a eunuch. Oh my God, I can on this track and international and many times. There is no purport by the followers of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, but there are tikas by the Acharyas. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, "Only I have abandoned the battlefield because of this infamous act created by my feeble charioteer." Jiva Goswami says, "I have attained sin by a driver whose heart is without valor." Kliba Chitena. Sanatan Goswami says, "No one has ever fled from the battlefield. I have become sinful because of a cowardly driver, or because of committing offense. Only I have fled." So when I was looking through this, or looking at this verse, I was kind of like a bit, like the lesson in it didn't seem very obvious to me at first. But what did stick out to me was Jiva Goswami's tika, where he says, "I have attained sin by a driver whose heart is without valor." And the word valor really stuck out to me. And so I looked up, it's like specific definition. And valor means great courage and bravery, especially in battle or when facing severe danger. And so that's kind of like the theme of like today's class, is like valor within our own spiritual lives and how that manifests and what that means. So the first thing that I thought would be helpful was to kind of look at different pastimes of where people were fleeing the battlefield and how it's viewed differently depending on the context. So the three that we have was when Indra fled the battlefield, when Krishna left the battlefield when he was fighting Jarasandha, and when Arjuna did not want to fight in the Bhagavad Gita. So with Indra fleeing the battlefield, this is Canto 4, chapter 19, verse 13. Atrina kodito hantum pritu putro mata rataha anadvata sankrudash tishta tishteti chabravit. The translation is, when the son of the king of Prithu was informed by Atri of King Indra's trick, he immediately became very angry and followed Indra to kill him, calling, "Wait, wait." So the purport for this is, the words tishta, tishta are used by a Kshatriya when he challenges his enemy. When fighting, a Kshatriya cannot flee from the battlefield. However, when a Kshatriya out of cowardice flees from the battlefield, showing his back to his enemy, he is challenged with the words tishta, tishta. A real Kshatriya does not kill his enemy from behind, nor does a real Kshatriya turn his back on the battlefield. According to Kshatriya principle and spirit, one either attains victory or dies on the battlefield. Although King Indra was very exalted, being the king of heaven, he became degraded due to his stealing the horse intended for sacrifice. Therefore, he fled without observing the Kshatriya principles, and the son of Prithu had to challenge him with the words tishta, tishta. Canto 4, chapter 19, verse 13. And, excuse me, the context for that was, Indra was stealing the 100th cow for the sacrifice because, he was becoming envious of the sage who was performing the sacrifice because he didn't want to lose his position as the king of heaven. So that's one example where, someone flees the battlefield. And in that example, it's pretty different from the other ones, and we'll kind of see how as we read through the other ones as well. But for the second one, it's I'm going to be reading from Krishna book, chapter 51. Meanwhile, Jarasandha again attacked Mathura, this time with bigger divisions of soldiers, numbering 23 Akshahanis. Lord Sri Krishna wanted to save Mathura from the 18th attack of the great military divisions of King Jarasandha. In order to prevent further killing of soldiers and to attend to other important business, Lord Krishna left the battlefield without fighting. Actually, he was not at all afraid, but he pretended to be an ordinary human being, frightened by the immense quantity of soldiers and resources of Jarasandha. Without any weapons, he left the battlefield. Although his lotus feet were soft as the petals of a lotus flower, he proceeded for a very long distance on foot. This time, Jarasandha thought that Krishna and Balaram were very much afraid of his military strength and were fleeing from the battlefield. He began to follow them with all his chariots, horses, and infantry. He thought Krishna and Balaram to be ordinary human beings, and he was trying to measure the activities of the Lord. Krishna is known as Ranchor, which means one who has left the battlefield. In India, especially in Gujarat, there are many temples of Krishna which are known as temples of Ranchorji. Ordinarily, if a king leaves the battlefield without fighting, he is called a coward. But when Krishna enacts his pastime, leaving the battlefield without fighting, he is worshipped by the devotee. A demon always tries to measure the opulence of Krishna, whereas the devotee never tries to measure his strength and opulence, but always surrenders unto him and worships him. By following the footsteps of the pure devotees, we can know that Krishna, the Ranchorji, did not leave the battlefield because he was afraid, but because he had some other purpose. The purpose, as it will be revealed, was to attend to a confidential letter sent by Rukmini, his future first wife. The act of Krishna's leaving the battlefield is a display of one of his 6 opulences. Krishna is the supreme powerful, the supreme wealthy, the supreme famous, the supreme wise, the supreme beautiful, and similarly, he's the supreme renouncer. Srimad Bhagavatam clearly states that he left the battlefield in spite of having ample military strength. Even without his militia, however, he alone would have been sufficient to defeat the army of Jarasandha, as he had done 7 times before. Therefore, His leaving the battlefield is an example of his supermost opulence of renunciation. And then the last, pastime of someone not wanting to fight was Arjuna. In the Bhagavad Gita, he, brings up so many reasons why he can't fight. He's scared of sinful reactions if he does fight. He's scared of ruining, his family tradition and family line and having to fight against his family members. And ultimately, in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 9, he tells Krishna, I'm not going to fight. And then the Sanskrit for that is Sanjaya uvacha evam uktva rishikesham gudakesha parantapa nayotsya iti govindam uktva tushnim babuvaha. Sanjaya said, having spoke thus, Arjuna, chastiser of enemies, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight, and fell silent. The purport. Dhritarashtra must have been very glad to understand that Arjuna was not going to fight and was instead leaving the battlefield for the begging profession. But Sanjaya disappointed him again in relating that Arjuna was competent to kill his enemies, Parantapaha. Although Arjuna was, for the time being, overwhelmed with false grief due to family affection, he surrendered unto Krishna, the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple. This indicated that he would soon be free from the false lamentation resulting from family affection and would be enlightened with perfect knowledge of self-realization, or Krishna consciousness, and then would surely fight. Thus, Dhritarashtra's joy would be frustrated, since Arjuna would be enlightened by Krishna and would fight to the end. So these three different pastimes have kind of the same thing, they're all kind of doing the same thing, but obviously, depending on the context and the intentionality behind it, it all is actually very different. So with Indra, he is, it's explicitly said that his action was an act of cowardice, and that's because he was, doing it from a place of fear of losing his position. He was doing it from a place of envy, and it was not the proper act to do in that time. And with Krishna, his is not an act of cowardice. He was doing it because he wanted to protect the citizens of Mathura from the 18th attack of Jarasandha, and he also had to attend to Rukmini's letter, which is, revealed later in the chapter. And ultimately, him leaving the battlefield is a show of his detachment and of his opulence of, renunciation. And then with Arjuna, I felt that this was the pastime that I feel like we could probably relate to the most. At least I related to quite a bit. The parts that really stuck out to me in the purport was that Arjuna was overwhelmed with false grief due to family affection. And although he was overwhelmed, he surrendered unto Krishna, the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple. And this means that he's soon going to be free from false lamentation resulting from family affection and will be enlightened with perfect knowledge of self-realization, and then he will surely fight. So he had a lot of fear. He didn't want to do it. He had this family attachment, and despite that, he decided, I'm going to surrender to you, Krishna. And Krishna, as the supreme spiritual master, gave him this instruction, and that transformed the way that Arjuna saw that battle that day. So I felt that in our own lives, we are ultimately fighting, spiritual warfare. We're fighting against Maya. We're fighting against, all the different forces of this world. And, spiritual life is a battlefield, and every day we have to, in the Bible it says put on the armor of God, which is, I take to mean daily sadhana and association with devotees and things of that nature. But I think that with the verse from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 9, where, it says in the purport that Arjuna surrendered to Krishna as the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple, it shows the huge role that the spiritual master plays within one's spiritual life. When I was listening to a class by my Guru Dev the other day, and he was saying that you can't really surrender to Krishna unless you're within disciplic succession and have a spiritual master who's connected to Krishna. Because when you're trying to figure out Krishna's instructions on your own, you're going to become bewildered. However, the instructions being given by the spiritual master to the disciple allow one to truly surrender to Krishna, allow one to truly detach from this world and achieve self-realization. So I felt like within this battle that we're fighting, the role that the spiritual master plays is supreme. He's like the general, kind of calling the shots, and we're just going out and fighting the war. So the instruction that you receive from your spiritual master transform your understanding and allow you to actually reach a place of surrender where you're then able to enact what it is that Krishna really wants you to do in this world and in this battle. Another verse from the Gita was chapter 18, verse 73, is Arjuna says, "My illusion is now gone. I have regained my memory by your mercy. I am now firm and free from doubt, and I am prepared to act according to your instructions." So with that verse, it's clear that, his illusion has been cleared up because he listened to the instructions of his spiritual teacher, in that context, Krishna, and he was able to, release this illusion and step into the truth of the matter. And since he was free from doubt, he was prepared to actually act. And this is something that, comes up a lot within my own life and my own spiritual life. But I think sometimes, I think we were talking about it a couple classes ago, but, the different ways our body reacts to fear, like fight or flight, but there's also freeze. And Arjuna was definitely having a freeze moment there. He was, he was unable to act. He was the hair on my skin is standing on end, my mouth is getting dry, I can't imagine fighting my family. And he was frozen. But what this verse, the verse in chapter 2 and the verse in chapter 18 shows is that being fearless and being courageous doesn't necessarily mean that someone has a lack of fear. And for a long time, I thought that's what that meant. I thought to be fearless within Krishna consciousness means you're not scared of anything, and you're just going to go out there and you're going to do whatever it takes. But in reality, being fearless means I may experience this fear, I may feel this fear, but I know that there's a higher purpose. I know that Krishna's got my back, and I've got to go forward. And a really good example of this is Srila Prabhupada. When he, reaches the Boston Harbor on the Jaladuta, he, writes the prayer where he's saying, Krishna, I don't know why you've brought me here to this terrible place. I know you have some business for me, because otherwise, why would I be here? And he's saying, Krishna, I don't know why I'm here, but whatever it is, you can make me a success, you can make me a failure, you can make me dance, do with me as you please. And that, to me, is such a great example of what it is to truly be fearless, to truly, be courageous. The battlefield, that battlefield is, Prabhupada entering the United States, Prabhupada entering Boston, and he is unsure. He's why am I here? What am I going to be doing here? What will these people even want to hear my message? Are they even going to be receptive to Krishna consciousness? But he knows that he can push through this fear because he's surrendered unto Krishna. He's a pure devotee that has fully surrendered to Krishna, and within that surrender, that's where the potency for, courage comes from. That's where the potency for fearlessness comes from. And for us, at least like for me, like someone who's not a pure devotee, surrendering unto the pure devotee, surrendering unto the spiritual master allows us to, come within that line and have a bit of that potency as well. So even within our own spiritual lives, even though we may have so many moments where we're experiencing a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, we can just remember like the instructions of our spiritual master, try to, become deeper connected through hearing and chanting, and ultimately that is what will help us become fearless, become courageous. And it just goes back to what, was said earlier, like with Jiva Goswami, talking about having a heart of valor. To develop a heart of valor, to have this great courage, to have this great bravery, that's not something that happens, that's just, it's not like I used to think some people are just inherently made that way and then other people aren't. Like, that's what I thought. But it's clear that through these different pastimes and through hearing like Arjuna's story, it's clear that the feeling of valor, the feeling of courage is something that happens when one decides to surrender unto the spiritual master. Yes. So, and when we're looking at, with this pastime specifically, it's interesting because Pradyumna is, really angry with his charioteer because he has, has moved him from the battlefield. And that's ultimately the duty of the charioteer, is to remove the person from the battlefield when there's some sort of grave injury and the person may not be able to fight. It's like in like a mood of protection. But I think that was also like really interesting too, because, it kind of made me think, like, when we're endeavoring within our spiritual life, we have to know when is it time to like go forward and fight this battle in a way that, like, we have to know like when to endeavor and when to kind of take a break and to stop. Krishna, like, I'm thinking of Prabhupada, like how he started, I think it was the League of Devotees first, and unfortunately that did not work out, but he continued, he persevered, and that is, an example of where, like, despite having hardships and despite things not working out the way he thought they were going to, he decided to persevere, and ultimately it did end up in success. But there was also, like, when we're thinking of Indra, who, like, committed this, like, act of cowardice, I think what's really important is, like, the intention behind what our endeavors are. Indra's intention was coming from a place of envy, was coming from a place of fear, whereas Prabhupada, when he, made the League of Devotees and then ultimately went on to create ISKCON, it was always coming from a place of service, coming from a place of wanting to please Krishna. So within our own spiritual lives, I think it's important to, really dissect what is our motive when we are doing anything, really. But, especially if we're, like, sharing Krishna consciousness with others, if we are, wanting to start something or maybe wanting to end something, when we're looking within our own lives, we really need to look at the motive behind our action, because that is what makes it clear, is this an act of courage or is this an act of cowardice? If it's an act of courage because we're, constantly trying to please Krishna and serve Krishna, then, that's an act of courage. And if it's coming from a place of, like, one of our anarthas, then it's more an act of cowardice. And kind of like an example I have from my own life is when I was in the university, and we had the student, like the Bhakti Yoga Club. We had a Bhakti house where we would hold like home programs 3 times a week, or not 3 times a week, twice a week, Monday and Friday. And those were the programs that I, came up in. I attended those, and they're really fun and really helpful in developing my Krishna consciousness. So when I was given the opportunity to lead those programs, I was very excited because I knew it would allow me to, share what had been given to me. And with my specific situation, I was, doing the home programs, and I was vice president of the club, and I was working 2 jobs, and I was in school. So it ultimately ended up being way too much. It wasn't feasible for me to carry all of that load while also just trying to like maintain my daily sadhana and just like, just general life things that you have to do. And I came to my guru, and I was like, I'm really having a hard time. Like, I want to continue doing these programs, and I want to maintain this house. However, I don't think it's like, I just can't see a way out, my sadhana's suffering. My grades aren't doing that well because I'm trying so hard to juggle all of these different things. And through like his instruction and his advice, I was, able to make the decision to take a step back. And I continued being the vice president of the club, and we continued having programs, but not home programs and not to the same like level that we were having them before, which at the time I felt super guilty about, because I thought, it felt like kind of like an act of cowardice. It felt like I was leaving the battlefield. It felt like I was, running away right when things were getting good. But now I'm able to look back on it, and I'm really grateful for the decision that I made, because it allowed me to go deeper within my own spiritual life, because I was able to focus more on my sadhana, and it allowed me to form deeper connections with the people in the club, because I wasn't so frazzled thinking about preparing this and cooking that and going there and doing here and like it was too much of an over endeavor. So in that moment, that is kind of like where, courage and fearlessness had to come up in my life, because I knew, like, I was scared to make that decision of taking a step back. However, it ultimately was the right decision, because it allowed me to go deeper within my service, and ultimately everything ended up working out. It ended up allowing other people to take a step forward and hold home programs as well, like other students within the club, which gave them an opportunity to be engaged in service. So ultimately it all ended up working out. But yeah, I think that there's so many different ways that fear kind of dictates our actions, in small ways and in big ways. I think a big way that's kind of, being discussed right now is with like the Vaishnavi Diksha Guru issue. To me, like from my perspective, it seems that there seems to be a fear of like challenging the status quo, or a fear of, doing things differently from the way that things have been done a long time or something, or a fear of what would happen if, different people were to gain like leadership or responsibility. And when operating from that place of fear, it's easy to really lose sight of the instructions of the spiritual master. But if we're following in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada, like, he was fearless. He was doing whatever it took to spread this message, to share Krishna consciousness with everyone around the world. He was not holding back. He, was completely compassionate and completely opening the floodgates of mercy. And he did not believe that Krishna consciousness was for some people and not for others. He shared it with the whole world. And if we keep that mood, I think that we'll be able to make decisions that come from a place of courage, from a place of valor, from a place of truly being connected to his like compassionate mood, to his fearless mood, because we're not deciding that we're going to, make decisions from a place of fear, ultimately. We're making decisions from a place of what can we do to please Srila Prabhupada, what can we do to please Krishna? And ultimately, it's clear that Prabhupada's mission was, more devotees, happier devotees. And putting a limit on who can practice Krishna consciousness fully, who can take leadership roles within Krishna consciousness, who can, share Krishna consciousness with other people, is basically just like shooting ourselves in the foot and making it so that his mission of more devotees, happier devotees is not, it's not going to be easy to fulfill that mission if we are constantly constricting ourselves to a very specific type of, a very specific type of person who can share Krishna consciousness or whatever like that. So ultimately, the overarching theme with this verse and with this story is, what it means to be fearless and what it means to persevere when you're on the spiritual battlefield. And so I think that going forward, I think a lot of us can really take the time to analyze within our own lives, where am I, acting from a place of fear, and how can I transform that fear into courage by remembering the instructions of my spiritual master, by connecting deeper to the mood of Srila Prabhupada. And when that happens, we'll be able to be truly fearless and follow Krishna's instructions. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you.
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Bhaskachari Satarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Bhaskachari Satarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Golokananda, Nanda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Radha Golokananda, Radha Golokananda, Shri Radhe, Jaya Giri Govardhan, 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 Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Gurudev, Gurudev, Gurudev,
Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Premsika Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nishananda Shri Vaiti Girodhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki jai. Jai Radha Krishna Gopa Gopana Shai Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Gurvani ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai. Mai Paranavadip Dham ki jai. Jagat Puri Dham ki jai. Ganga Maya ki. Yamuna Maya ki. Bhakti Devi ki. Srimati Tulsi Devi ki. Harinam Sankirtan ki. Briyat Madanga ki. Samaveda Bhaktivinda ki. Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada ki jai. If you're in town this weekend, please join us. Chapel Hill from 4 to 6 Saturday afternoon. The students are back. The weather will be sunny. It will be hot, but we'll be out there on Franklin Street in front of the post office in Chapel Hill. Please come 4 to 6 p.m. on Saturday. Hare Krishna. Chaitodarpanam Marjanam. Thank you for the beautiful. Darpanam Shreya Kairavya Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipanam Pranamrita Swadanam Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatrapitani Amitasmaranena Kala Etadrishita Vakripa Bhagavan Mamapi Durdaiva Midrishami Hajjani Nanuraga Trinadapi Sunichena Trarorapi Suhishuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Siddhahari Nadaram Najaram Nasundarim Kavitam Vajagadishakamai Mama Janmani Ishvarim Bhavatad Bhaktir Hoitaki Twai Ainanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishamevavam Buddha Kribayatavapada Pankaja Stita Duli Sajashim Vichintaya Nayanam Gadadushu Daraya Varanam Gad Gadarudaya Gira Pulakarnishitam Vapukada Tavanamagrahane Bhavishyati Yugayatam Namishena Chakshusha Pravashayatam Shunayatam Jagat Sarvam Govindam Virahename Ashlishyavapadam Rastumam Adarshanam Marmahata Karotuva Yatatadava Vidadatulam Pato Mat Prananatastusa Evanapara. Victory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life, of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, congregational chanting your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you've invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the street One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O Son of